kingdoms moved north to gain this knowledge. They lost all knowledge, in fact. They lost all knowledge themselves. They came back toward the what? The south, where they knew that the knowledge existed. But then the raging debate was this. There were 6 skeletons found upon the earth. And we touched upon this last week, but I wasn't able to go in depth. I moved up the subject. And they, as we know it today, they're called Australopithecus, Homo habilis, Homo erectus, Grimaldi man, Cro-Magnon slash Neanderthal, and Homo sapiens. These are very important, primarily because of this. It would prove a fact that could not from then on be gainsaid, right? Again, the European inquest could not establish the fact that they were the oldest species upon the earth, what we call human wise. And now that term I shun, but for conversation's sake, human. Our ancestors them never accepted themselves as a human. They understood what that meant, nor did it apply to them. We were what? Man, something very important, means something very significant, not human, right? That the European has us actually using in our vernacular, right? And so now what begins to happen now? That goes to Asia. They cannot find again any skeleton. But when they went into the motherland, this is when we become first aware of the skeletons that they would find. 4.6 million years, 6.4, 6.2 million years respectively, right? And now they find 3 of the skeleton intact. And intact mean that they would find these skeletons nowhere else other than the continent. Homo habilis, Homo erectus, and Australopithecus, Homo habilis, and Homo erectus. And these names are given, not that the skeleton has names or call themselves that, but primarily the places they were found and the people who were involved in their founding. You see? And so what happens with these three skeletons? They only found them on the continent of Africa. And throughout the European and the Asian excavation of the entire earth, none of these skeletons has been found no place else. Now, the first skeleton that was found beyond the continent in that family of 6 was at the stage of Grimaldi man. And Grimaldi man is very important. He is called Grimaldi because there's a place in Italy that is called Grimaldi. And they found the skeleton buried underneath. It's like a grave with other skeletons on it, other Neanderthal, Cro-Magnon, and so they were able to conclude that this was the oldest skeleton in that region. Now, Neanderthal, Grimaldi man is very important because if we would notice, right, and a person who does what is considered like forensic work and who's familiar with autopsy would understand that what we call racist, in which there is no such thing as racist, but that what is called, for lack of a better term, the 3 primary races, meaning what they call black, white, or Mongoloid, right? Africoid, Caucasoid, and Mongoloid, right? That there are differences in the skull type. And the black skull is called dolichocephalic. And dolichocephalic is an unscientific way in which you would always know a black skull. The hairline on the chin never lines up. It's always a jutting process in it. That's why for most black people we have what we call a jutting jaw. You see? And then the Asian is called the Caucasian skull is called brachycephalic. And brachycephalic means a long-headed skull, right? And there are measurements from ear to ear. With the dolichocephalic skull, there's a particular orbital and nasal measurement and everything involved, right? And then there is what is called the Asian skull. Skull is called the mesocephalic, right? And so you have the dolichocephalic, which is known as the black hair. You have the brachycephalic, which is known as the long hair, and then you have what is called the mesocephalic, which is called the broad head of the Caucasian skull. You see, and so uniquely, what they find is that at the stage of Grimaldi man is still in its dolichocephalic state. So there could have been no type of discussion in relation to who is the identity of this individual. You see, and they have agreed. Almost everyone agreed that the concept of burying your dead, when you begin to bury your dead, you've reached a level of what they call civilization. You see, that you don't just throw your dead around. When you have a more or less a honorary place for them and rites and rituals involved, you deem to have created a level of civilization. So when they saw that, when they went into this tomb or this burial place, and they saw that above it was Cro-Magnon and Neanderthal, and these bones were scattered, and that they saw that underneath it was Grimaldi man. Grimaldi man was actually what they call properly buried, and the Grimaldi man is uniquely related to who? The African. Then they knew that they had to accept the concept that black people was here before anyone else upon this planet. Now what you would find is that at the stage of Grimaldi man is when black people began to actually leave the continent and began the exploration of this whole earth. Now, contrary to what we may see today, in which we find diverse set of seas divides, as we call the division of the seas, like the Pacific Ocean, the Atlantic Ocean, and different seas and things. Ancestors tell us that at one time the planet was what? Singular, one, and that at certain periods, certain upheavals upon the earth, that the earth crust began to move, and water came between and began to divide lands that were uniquely one at that time. You see what I'm saying? And so what begins to happen, according to our scientific information, it says that 70,000 years to 100,000 years to 70,000 years ago, there was a period upon this earth called the warming glacier. And what happened was that those of our ancestors who had left Africa and began to track into what the areas that would be called Europe and Asia, that they would begin to be trapped. Ice and snow began to come down. You know, these are not conditions that were usual on the continent. You know, the continent was known, and the southern areas of the world were always known as what? As hot areas, tropical climates. This is why you find grain growing in all seasons. This is what made us different, and this is why we can say beyond the shadow of a doubt, with the type of environment we grew up in, that there could not have been any contest to prove that black people created civilization as opposed to the Europeans creating civilization. You know, and then there's a unique philosophy, psychology, and consciousness of psychosis that is produced from those two conditions. You know, ancestors them says that what came out of what we call that ice, that northern, that refrigerated condition, when the Africans who went in there and became demyelinated because of the condition, a change in eye, a change in hair, and a change in the epidermis hue that we call skin hue, was not just a change in the physical features, but psychologically there were a change. And that what they brought out were 3Ds. We call them the 3Ds: death, domination, and destruction. And you would find that any literature you read from 500 years ago, this boy began his process for the march of global hegemony. And every literature you read, you could find that he has been consistent in bringing those three factors to the earth and its inhabitants. You could find that every species, be it be it on land, be it on sea, be it among the forestry, you will find that everything is being threatened with annihilation since the pale man has come upon the earth. We could find that everything that is being destructive, and this isn't something that I'm saying, it could actually be proven. Anything you could think of as negative has come out of this boy mind. You would find that though black people today has participated in through 400 plus years of acculturation and wrongful indoctrination in a lot of his things, remember, and children would rule over you. You would find that at the core of black people nature, it is quite different. And we could go into many truths to establish this to such a degree that the concept of an army is only necessary when there are some type of conflict created between parties or nations, and the only settlement is there is through death. The African was so advanced, and this is where the concept of Mayat, and we talk about the principle of Mayat: truth, justice, reciprocity, propriety, balance, order, and harmony come into play. My act was so supreme with what we would call, and what we know today, but we call them wrongly, the pharaohs, right? You would find that at one point of time that the Africans never developed an army. That the army was only developed on the continent when the Pale people came in and began their invasion. Imagine living in a society, right, to such a degree, right, that these moral truths are the epitome, the apex of the society, to such a degree. Watch the laws our ancestors govern themselves by. We know them today. We call it the 144 negative confessions, right? And then watch the difference of the laws we have inherited, right? We have been through our constitution, and I know I've been on different topics, but all of these tie in, right? Through our constitution, we say things like, thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not steal, thou shalt not this, right? But in the confessions, right, the Africans said that I have not what? Kill. I have not what? Steal. I have not committed adultery. I have not violated my neighbor. It's two different concepts when you understand and you see and you hear those applications. Again, a vast discussion for another day. But it's put out there for some thinking to show that the African